Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Jeff Spicer, Chief Marketing Officer of Yellowbrick. We're coming to you today from Palo Alto, California, where Yellowbrick is headquartered. Answers for a world that can't wait. That's what we're calling our event today because we think the most essential thing for your business or organization today is immediate answers. It is absolutely critical that your business be able to answer any question, no matter how complicated and no matter how diverse the data set, in real time. Why is it so much more important today than even at the beginning of the year that we get answers to these business questions so fast? I think the answer is obvious. It's because we've gone through an unbelievable amount of change in such a short period of time. And for your business to survive, it needs clear answers based on analysis of all available data. And we can't artificially categorize that data anymore as historic or streaming or IoT or edge. It's all data, and it must be analyzed now for us to get the right answers. You know, if I step back for a moment and think back to the beginning of the year, to January of 2020, it's almost hard to fathom how much has changed and the impact that's had on our businesses. For example, at the beginning of the year when we built our company's marketing plan, it included networking events, live roundtable discussions, conferences across the country. But in mid-March, we did what most of you did. We threw those plans in the trash and started over. And what happened over the next months was difficult, uncharted, and incredible all at the same time. It's what McKinsey calls the Great Acceleration. Trends that were already underway, like the movement to cloud computing, the convergence of related technologies, or artificial intelligence finding a more relevant role in the business. Those trends dramatically increased because of the global pandemic as a result of businesses racing to modernize. And there's one trend, or it's really a set of imperatives, that we're here to talk about today, and that's the expectations and demands placed on analytics systems. Why are these systems even more critical to your business today, and how do they need to evolve fast to better support your business needs and aid in making critical decisions? That's what the next 2 hours are about, and they're a very fast-paced, packed 120 minutes. Our schedule today is this. In just a second, I'm going to introduce our CEO, Neil Carson, for his insights into building a real-time analytics system. Then we'll turn it over to Justin Kestelin, our head of product marketing here at Yellowbrick, for a roundtable discussion with a few of our customers, Tioco, ACI, and Highmark Health. They're going to discuss analytics and data warehouse challenges, the challenges they've faced over the past 6 months, and how they've overcome them. After that, we welcome Matt Aslett from 451 Research to talk about digital and analytics transformation initiatives as a direct result of the pandemic. Then we'll check in with Alan Holmes, our Yellowbrick VP of Strategic Business Development. He's going to be chatting with our partners Denodo, MicroStrategy, and Capgemini. And we will end the program today with a conversation with Dr. Mike Osterholm, the state epidemiologist of Minnesota. Chris Matizik of ZDNet will talk with Dr. Mike about the role of analytics in defeating COVID-19. In addition to thanking all of our guests, I want to thank all of our great sponsors who have made this program possible today. Our experience is meant to be engaging and virtual, and you can take part in a couple of ways. Engage with us via the chat window on your screen, or follow and take part in the Twitter conversation in real time at Yellowbrick Data. Also, the sponsors section of our event window will be live for a couple of hours after the event ends today. If you'd like to engage with our platinum, gold, and silver sponsors, we'll keep that section open and you will find real people on the other end of the chat window. I hope you find the next 120 minutes informative and thought-provoking. And if there's something you missed, please come back and listen to the on-demand replay. Our next section is sponsored by Denodo. Thank you, Denodo. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our Yellowbrick CEO and founder, Neil Carson.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here today. Jeff's mentioned some of the accelerations that have happened within business over the last few months. Accelerations in moving storage and computing to the cloud, the convergence of technologies that are related to one another, more and more adoption of mobile technologies within the enterprise. Corona and related disruptions have caused forward-looking companies to think hard about their modernization strategies and move faster instead of slower. One of those accelerations has to do with how data smart your company is. Specifically, how quickly your company enables its teams to make really insightful decisions based on analysis of relevant data. It's not a big coincidence, but my point of view is that the single most important set of technologies you should be investing in today are those that comprise your analytics infrastructure. Coincidentally, that happens to be the business of Yellowbrick. But that may also be the technology that determines whether your business survives. There are 3 factors that cause me to say this. Factor number 1, speed of insight matters. The faster your business can answer the questions accurately and insightfully, the more likely it is to avoid pitfalls and take advantage of new opportunities. Factor number 2, completeness of insight matters. The futurist Peter Drucker said that when you see a successful business, someone once made a courageous decision. The implication was that we never have a full set of data when we make decisions, but that's rapidly becoming not true. Today's systems, perhaps your competitors' systems, can ingest massive amounts of data in real time. Only companies that can analyze all of their data, no matter how old or new, no matter where it's stored, will really thrive. Factor number 3, getting answers to the right people matters. Answers need to be immediately accessible to the people who need them the most, no matter where in your company they happen to be. You can't build a data-driven organization unless it has self-service access to data and analytics. People have to be able to explore and use that data to shape their own insights and become citizen data scientists. But to build an analytics system that provides instant insight to your organization, you have challenges to overcome. Challenges that have been decades in the making, and these are challenges that must be addressed now. First, the infrastructure that underpins data warehouses and data lakes is aging. We haven't seen new updates to this infrastructure for decades. Legacy data warehouses were considered a sophisticated technology when they were first developed nearly 4 decades ago. An entire ecosystem grew up around these warehouses and marts, in part because the needs of the warehouse were so complex. A company needed dozens of tools and resources to move data, normalize it, and prepare it for humans to consume. But that scenario doesn't work anymore, and warehouses simply can't keep up with increasing data volume and complexity, real-time data, and large numbers of users. Even after costly hardware upgrades or cloud migrations and endless maintenance to squeeze out every last ounce of performance. And then there was Hadoop. A lot of us were really excited about Hadoop. Hadoop made big promises around big data. Hadoop was even going to kill data warehouses. Although the low-cost storage was a benefit for dumping data into, Hadoop was unable to fulfill the promise of enabling analytics at scale. Despite repeated attempts by open source and commercial solutions to add layer upon layer upon layer on top, getting actionable insights was just too slow and too complicated. Next, the move to the cloud has put all sorts of pressures on analytics systems. Businesses have moved many of their technical operations to the cloud for a variety of sound reasons. To achieve theoretically instant scalability, to modernize their IT operations, or to shift resources to more strategic tasks. But with this move has come a host of considerations. For example, where to store data can be problematic. Companies may have security or regulatory concerns that impact their ability to take advantage of the cloud's flexibility. Your company might also use multiple clouds for various data and analytics tools, so stitching those different environments together becomes a new integration project. And if you choose to keep some data on site and some in the cloud, you're setting up a hybrid situation. Cloud-only warehouses offer the scale you need, but performance can become unpredictable and cost per query is unacceptably high. After all, we all want our users to do more queries, not less. Furthermore, some workloads will be risky or impossible to migrate due to data gravity or security concerns, and for providers with native solutions, lock-in is a given. The final challenges that you're probably facing are with modern BI and data science tools. They've outpaced advances in the analytics infrastructure that supports them. These tools have become increasingly advanced in their ability to help us visualize answers. They even use AI to guide the very process of discovering new insights. While these tools can work just fine against traditional systems, the more data you feed them and the more speed you give them from the underlying warehouse, the more value you get out of them. We at Yellowbrick believe there are 5 imperatives that every company must follow as it builds a real-time answers system. First, and most importantly, within your organization, you have to build a culture of immediate answers. You must change your company's mindset to one in which the company demands answers from data in real time. This means you can't settle for systems that rely on batch processing, are limited to analyzing only historical data, or are encumbered by slow data movement. We at Yellowbrick are involved with one of the world's largest insurance companies. This company, like so many others, used to devote 2 days per month to processing claims. They'd often execute the processing over a weekend so as not to impact other users. But then regulatory and compliance changes mandated that they take a hard look at the speed and accuracy of their analysis. By modernizing their data warehouse, this company shortened its claim processing from 2 days per month to 2 hours per month. Absolutely incredible. I tell this story not because it's about a specific technology, but rather it's about a culture and mindset shift. Why wait for regulatory changes to insist that you have a culture of real-time answers? Don't wait. Insist on a culture of real-time answers now. Imperative number 2 is what I call smart innovation. Smart innovation means maintaining flexibility to make the right architectural decisions about analytics now and into the future, otherwise known as future-proofing. This concept is often associated with avoiding lock-in, but that's a very simplistic way to think about it. Actually, future-proofing derives from a commitment to standards and preserving the ability to make the right architectural choices for the right reasons at the right time. For example, committing to industry standard means you won't have to replace existing investments, to rehire or retrain engineers, or to create new data silos whenever you onboard a new platform. Industry standard APIs tend to stay that way for a very long time, making them good long-term bets for future innovation. As for architectural choices, we strongly believe that you shouldn't have to choose between on-premises and the cloud for deployment of your warehouse, nor should you have to choose a single cloud. Instead, you should have the agility to deploy and run analytic workloads wherever it makes the most sense, whether for economic, security, or data gravity reasons, and even build multi-cloud analytic applications if needs be. Imperative number 3. It's just not okay anymore for the data warehouse to be down for a couple of days. Analytic platforms are now nearly as critical as transactional systems. Information is the lifeblood of business, and when the blood stops flowing, bad things happen. But for businesses with data transformation at the core of their value proposition, such as SaaS providers, even that metaphor understates the importance of data availability. You simply can't afford to entrust those functions to a data warehouse without robust high availability, fault tolerance, and disaster recovery. For those reasons, your business continuity strategy can't be an afterthought. Although it's really not an exciting topic for a startup, we continue to disproportionately invest engineering time in stability, availability, fault tolerance, and business continuity. Imperative number 4, transform, don't get there incrementally. If ever there was a time for transformation, it's now. Any analytics strategy that you're going to invest in must be transformative for you and for your customers. Incremental changes are a terrible way to get significant gains quickly. You'll never achieve real-time answers for your entire organization if you're bolting onto an existing legacy system or applying patches and point upgrades. Let me ask you a simple question about your data warehouse bill. What are you paying for? Are you paying for real-time answers? Are you paying for transformation? Are you paying to leap ahead of your competitors? Or are you using the same technology as them? Chances are you're using the same technology and paying for maintenance. I'm here to tell you that maintenance and transformation are not related. Maintenance means standing still. The root word of maintenance is to maintain or stasis. It means paying for current capabilities and nothing more. If you want to move forward, you have to move beyond maintenance. You have to insist that your budget pays for transformation. Another company that we're involved with, called Tioco, does something called revenue assurance on billing for 40% of all of the phone calls in the US. It's a core business process for its customers, yet Tioco couldn't meet its SLAs because of its legacy platform despite paying millions in maintenance. The company decided to transform. It didn't iterate, and in doing so opened up the door to completely new possibilities. For imperative 4, I remind you that history favors the bold. Imperative number 5, operate at the speed of thought. Peter Drucker again said years ago, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. But with the speed of change in information today, we may well update that adage to, if you can't make decisions in real time, you can't survive, because it's possible for us to measure everything. Fraud detection is the classic example here because latencies of minutes or even seconds defeat its entire purpose. The objective should be for fraudulent transactions to be rejected before processing is complete. The pandemic has made this imperative even more stark. In the retail world, we're seeing a clear line emerge between winners and losers. Those that most quickly adapt to e-commerce are the winners. That adaptation would be impossible without the ability to deeply understand inventory, supply chain, and consumer behavior. And you can't do that without instant access to lots of complex data at the speed of thought. It almost goes without saying that the ideal healthcare response to a pandemic, as we'll hear from Dr. Osterholm later, would be premised on very similar capabilities. But even in normal times, the pharmaceutical industry's Eroom's law, which is Moore's law spelled backwards, states that the cost of developing a new drug roughly doubles every 9 years. The only way through that problem is to radically improve our ability to predict outcomes through rapid data analysis on huge amounts of clinical data. Those are our 5 imperatives. Number 1, build a culture of immediate answers that insists on providing real-time insights to your entire organization. Number 2, employ smart innovation as your guide to help make architectural decisions and prepare for the hybrid cloud. Number 3, insist on reliability and availability. Analytics systems are now considered business critical and as such must be treated that way. Number 4, transform, don't be incremental. Stop paying millions in maintenance to do the same stuff as your competitors. And number 5, move quickly and build a data platform for your users that operates at the speed of thought. That's what we believe, and that's what we practice here at Yellowbrick. We believe that if you follow these imperatives to building an analytics infrastructure, you'll compete and win with the best of them, no matter how big or small. I leave you with one final thought, which is we shouldn't penalize real-time curiosity. I'll tell you what I mean by this. A while ago, we did a project with a company that makes snacks. The company had a logistics problem trying to ensure timely operation of the entire supply chain, from sourcing the raw ingredients, typically potatoes, to the manufacturing process and then onward distribution of the finished product. Efficiency of the supply chain and managing distribution according to customer demand naturally impacted the profitability of the business. A hiccup anywhere had an impact. This customer did an excellent job of database and schema design, with fairly well normalized data, meaning their entire warehouse for a Fortune 500 company with sufficient historical data was only about 10 terabytes. Visibility to the live data in all the different departments was through Tableau dashboards and reports, all of which offered an ability to arbitrarily drill down into the data to uncover additional insights. There were typically around 1,000 users on the system at a time, and the data being consumed by a report ran to several terabytes. Managers in all parts of the business use this application continuously, but previously the company was constrained by the need to create materialized views and summaries in order to gain acceptable performance. Managers wanted to generate their own analytics and change and pivot the data at will, in essence to become citizen data scientists. However, they were constrained by doing so. As they imagined new queries, they were booted off the system by workload management rules due to missing materialized views, causing it to slow down too much. These managers gave up trying to become curious for asking questions of their data because change tickets had to be filed by the staff to add new materialized views to answer the queries, turning exploratory peeps into data into processes that took days or longer, stifling the ability of the staff to have a larger impact. Our project with this company was to allow them to be curious and do it in real time. We allowed completely ad hoc analytics without materialization to enable the creativity of the company's staff. Nobody wants to wait for answers anymore. After all, if Google can search the whole internet in an instant, why can't I query my own data just as fast? Thank you.
Welcome to Yellowbrick, the only modern data warehouse for hybrid cloud. 100 times faster performance, thousands of concurrent users, and petabytes of data. Get faster, richer, more accurate insights, all while saving millions in costs. Yellowbrick gives you the power to make the right decisions, the ones that vault your business ahead of the competition, now and in the future. Schedule a demo at yellowbrick.com.
Every business and industry has been impacted this year by dramatic disruption. Organizations everywhere are seeing changes in enterprise data, stresses to their analytics infrastructure, and even huge impact on their business models. How should investments in analytics change to meet these challenges? We're going to turn to some of our customers for an answer to this question. Joining us next are Faye Henris, the VP of Business Analytics at TEOCO, Mitch Kwiatkowski, Vice President of Enterprise Data Hub, Enterprise Analytics at Highmark Health, and Steve Emmerich, the Chief Architect at ACI Worldwide. And before I turn this over to our moderator, Justin Kesslin, who's our VP of Product Marketing here at Yellowbrick, I want to mention that this section is sponsored by our amazing partner, Sisense. Justin, over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Really happy to be here and really excited about our industry panel today. We have 3 guests each of them experts in their respective industries, and I'm really looking forward to hearing their take on this subject. So why don't we get straight into the questions? My first question, or the first topic, is basically I'm going to ask each of you to describe how data is used as a strategic asset within your respective organization. And please feel free to tell us a little bit about your organization as well, so we can kind of get the context about how data is used there. Why don't we go ahead and start in alphabetical order with respect to last name. So Steve, let's start with you.
Hello, I'm Steve Emmerich. I work for ACI Worldwide, a payments software provider and solutions provider to banks and merchants and intermediaries. And ACI has about 5,000 clients spread across everything from fraud to wire payments to online banking to ATM driving and point of sale driving and every form of electronic payment imaginable. Virtually every one of those segments of our marketplace utilizes large scale reporting for various purposes. In particular, the one that uses analytics for strategic purposes is our merchant retail market, which encompasses e-commerce payments, point of sale, and merchant retail fraud detection. And the analytics and reporting, particularly analytics, is both real-time and near real-time. Real-time is strategically used to detect real-time payment fraud. So when one swipes one's credit card at a store or online and there's any suspicion of fraud, it's frequently our products that are detecting that based on patterns of usage, based on neural network models, based on rules, based on a whole variety of techniques, all of which revolve around real-time analytics. In addition, post-payment analysis of the data across not only an individual merchant, but across all merchants using the data in syndicated form can yield a tremendous amount of insight about fraud patterns nationwide, because fraudsters frequently engage in fraud patterns consistently across merchants or in, according to certain properties of the endpoint at which the fraud is committed. And these are characteristic of the way we use analytics. We also use it for packaged insights. We use it for customized exports to customers, syndicated exports to data partners, and solution optimization of various kinds within payment engines. So in summary, it's all about the data.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. So Faye, please tell us about Tioka.
Sure. Hi, Faye Henris. I'm with Tioka Corporation. Tioka's been around for about 25 years, and our client base is almost exclusively the telecommunications operators. We started in North America, but we've got a worldwide reach right now. And if you think about that client base, our clients, our telecommunications operators, are the enablers of and at the center of our data-driven digital universe. 20 years ago, when I first got into this game, we did analytics on the data that was derived by the operator networks, and those were largely or analog data points. And the analytics associated with them was more about aggregation and some pattern detection and some predictions. But the data, the way the data comes in, the way the volume of data, the way it's grown, and what types of data have changed dramatically, over that time span. We're now looking at things like video and telemedicine and smart cities and autonomous vehicles and drone traffic, and how we work with that and how we manage it is what really drives our analytics use cases. If you think about the growth in telecom, we're expecting to see double growth every 2 years on the network traffic. And that alone for the last 10 years translates into a 50-fold increase. So from a TEOCO perspective, our analytic use cases are through the lens of our customers and what we provide to them. And that's them having a need to understand what's going across their network across several different business functions or silos. So from a network perspective, what's traveling the network? What is the anticipated expected demand? Where are the growth patterns going to be coming from? How do I build that out? How do I plan to meet the demand? And how do I optimize what I have? From a marketing perspective, our analytics for the carriers are around customer retention, attracting new customers, and then caring for those customers once they're there, understanding what their experience looks like from both a quality and a quantity standpoint, and being able to meet that demand. And from a financial perspective, we provide analytics around the core cost of the network, what it costs to maintain, what it costs to build, what future expenditures might look like, all flexing around demand that we have some visibility to, but is largely dependent on technology and innovation that while we have a handle on what we think is coming, it's been changing at light speed, so it's hard to predict.
Interesting. So Mitch, please tell us about data at Highmark Health.
Sure, thank you. My name is Mitch Kwiatkowski. I'm with Highmark Health, which is the second largest integrated and delivery financing system in the country. And what that means is we have a number of healthcare arms within the organization. From a healthcare insurer, we're a Blue Cross Blue Shield affiliate. We have a hospital and physician network, Allegheny Health Network, in Western Pennsylvania. We have United Concordia providing dental insurance across the country. We also have some other businesses like a technology and service provider organization with customers who are other health plans, other Blues. We also have a stop loss coverage insurance company and home health, post-acute, and so on. So it's a large, complex organization. So you can imagine that when it comes to data and analytics, there are a lot of different use cases that hit each organization. In particular, on the clinical side, it's easy to look at things like predicting infections, predicting hospitalizations. How do we reduce emergency room visits? On the health insurer side, we look at things like how do we lower costs and which members or subscribers are most at risk, and we try to work collaboratively then with physicians and getting patients and members the care that they need proactively and engaging them. And some of the other areas then is, as we try to combine the data, and that becomes where we see some of the more interesting use cases of being such a large organization with and being unique in a lot of ways in that we've got the clinical side and the health plan side. How do we take the best of what we've got in those, and for patients who are also Highmark members, how do we impact them even more? How do we take that? How do we build a 360-degree view of a person to really truly understand more about them, fill gaps with outside data from other organizations, continue to build on the models that we've got. As was mentioned before, we're exploring a lot of, I'd say, more novel things. Healthcare typically has been a little bit behind in some of the analytics that are out there, at least the technologies and adoption of some of the more advanced things. But I think it's very quickly catching up, and in some spaces jumping ahead. So we look at things like images, radiology, video, audio, genomics is starting to become a big thing that we're exploring right now. So a lot of it's trying to get ahead and really try to provide what's best in healthcare. We typically look at the triple aim: better care, better clinical care, lower costs, and better patient experience. So generally, we're trying to attack those three things.
So in all three of your industries, clearly data is not only extremely prevalent, but extremely strategic. Interesting. I'm hearing a lot of common threads there. So for a slightly different spin on this issue, as you all know, we're all living in a time of unprecedented change and disruption. I like to say that data-driven organizations of all kind are seeing patterns in data that they've never seen before, and they're all being challenged to adjust their businesses to account for those changes. How are, in your respective companies and industries, and this might hold for your organizations as well as your own customers, how are priorities in data analytics changing as a result of these disruptions? Do you feel like certain goals are becoming more important? Other goals are being deprioritized? Are new goals emerging? And give us your take on that issue. Steve, let's start with you again.
Well, the changes we're experiencing due to COVID have had a dramatic impact on patterns in payment processing. Electronic commerce has skyrocketed, and in-person purchasing has weakened. The growth of electronic payments as a consequence has accelerated as well, since all e-commerce is essentially electronic. That has definitely highlighted the need not only for handling the increasing volumes of data associated with electronic payments, but also for consolidating data across the channels with which payments are performed. So one can, one is people in the data business are always concerned with sort of omni-channel analysis of data. But I would say that the current events are accelerating the adoption of an omni-channel perspective. Just the nature of the insights that are possible and trying to predict what will happen has become a lot less predictable just as a function of historical experience and intuition, and the need for near real-time visibility into how those trends are changing as populations' expectations regarding how much can they socialize in stores and purchase in stores changes. So I would say that there is a rationalization that takes place at times of social change around business matters that we're experiencing with respect to the focus on the importance of data capture, data integration, data analytics, and real-time information reporting to many, many stakeholders, both on the business side and within our organization, and also on the part of our customers.
Faye, are you seeing similar trends in the telco industry with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our customers have seen some use cases vastly accelerated. If you think about the fact that they are serving a workforce or a client base that is now a home-based workforce, as opposed to geographically centered around metropolitan areas or retail areas. And that's put a significant strain on the demand and where demand is coming from in the network geographically. These are scenarios that not only were they not anticipated, they weren't even modeled. So while the expansion was certainly something that was scoped, the way that it's being scaled and scoped and where those points of creation are and how it needs to scale had not been. So that's a completely new use case. While also, holding in the back of our mind that we do hope at some point to get back to a level of normal. But what does that normal look like? Is it really the workforce we had before? Is it really the office buildings we had before? Whatever it is, there will be some difference and some shifts over the coming timeline that make it very important to have upward and downward scalability and flexibility into whatever network planning gets put in place now. There have been some new use cases too. So how do you track, how do you monitor service quality? How do you monitor home-based connectivity for a workforce that's shifted seismically? Other impacts, which are really not analytics driven, but more my industry driven from a use case perspective, which is going to be interesting, is the fact that our current situation has delayed, in some instances, the rollout of 5G deployments that had already been put on way, not just in North America, but worldwide, which is going to allow other entrants and other innovators a little bit of breathing room to either catch up in that race or start coming up with new technology that's going to be hitting our networks when we get back to something resembling a normal.
So Mitch, I have to think this question is probably maybe even most relevant of all for you. What's your take?
Yeah, for sure. I think what the pandemic has done for us is it's a couple things. One is it's shined a spotlight on the challenges that I mentioned before about being able to make the data liquid, being able to move the data. As we've, everybody reacted to COVID-19, trying to get a hold of data to do the best they could to try to do predictions of what the future was going to look like, to forecast as best as possible. But it was a challenge to get the data. What it did internally for us is it validated the direction that we were already looking to go. And if anything, it gave it more credence than maybe it had earlier, and more support for data and analytics than we were getting. And we've always been a very data informed, data decisive sort of organization. But as we've looked at trying to really broaden our data strategy across the enterprise, it has its challenges, again, because of the complexity of our enterprise. This has definitely made it, put it front and center. And now you start to add new use cases such as virtual health and the ability to see your physician face to face, remotely. A lot of people are turning towards that. That was something that didn't, the healthcare industry has been trying to do for a while, and it's finally started to take off. So being able to get that data moving quickly, available, when people need it, has become, that much more important. So it's definitely helped with that. And again, I think we're going to start to see probably a lot more data moving in alignment. There have been some federal regulations that have come up over the last year or so from the government to force interoperability between healthcare organizations, and I think this is, it's just everything's aligning really well for us. So again, as long as that data is useful, I think it's gonna be a huge benefit for analytics and healthcare.
In your respective industries, what would you think, or what would you call the next major challenge for data analytics? And again, you can just pick one example if you'd like, because there might be several challenges. Steve, why don't we go back to you on that?
For adopting organizations such as ACI Worldwide, how to balance the need for avoidance of, sort of the proprietary trap, while at the same time embracing the truly distinctive capabilities of these extremely accomplished vendor organizations. And how we navigate that over time is going to be very interesting. And I think this tension between centralized and distributed, cloud versus on-premise, all of these challenges that we face as organizations, because the data needs to remain extraordinarily secure, particularly in regulated industries, and how we manage that in the context of this, desire to avoid having to worry about managing and paying for data center infrastructure versus wanting to leverage public infrastructure is also going to enter into the equation. So that's how I would summarize the longer term concerns.
Faye, what's your take for TIOCO?
It'd be hard to narrow it down to one. We've got a couple. Obviously, the advent of 5G is going to bring with it a whole new wave of capabilities that are going to require analytic solutions to understand their impact. Most particularly, if we think about edge computing and what that involves. I talked about the higher speeds and the lower latencies that are going to be demanded by the users and the applications of that technology. So understanding that we don't have a full handle on what those new technologies are going to be and what the use cases are going to be, but still preparing to be able to ingest the real-time use and activity and provide back actionable insights, at point and at scale to the carriers. That's probably our largest challenge, followed shortly behind by blockchain technology, which is being adopted pretty early and pretty largely by the telecommunications industry, everything from smart contract and ordering all the way to billings and collections.
And Mitch, the last word is yours.
I think for healthcare, data is going to become easier to get a hold of. We're starting to look at more novel data sources or spending more focus on things like social determinants, things like housing quality, food insecurity. I think data is going to become more readily available. The challenge I see is not going to be technical. I think it's going to be, it's really going to be more in the space of ethical use. I think when we talk about ethical AI, ethical analytics, ethical data science, whatever we want to call it, I think that's going to be the big challenge to really focus on and say, well, you've got access to this data. You can do this, but should you do it? Making sure that we're not introducing bias and we're using the right data for the right reasons. I think that's going to be a big challenge, and that's something that we're going to have the discipline to really focus on and make sure that we address and get ahead of before it gets out of control too quickly.
Interesting. Let's pivot to solutions for a moment. Your companies are all Yellowbrick customers, and I want to thank you for that profusely. Maybe could each of you talk a little bit about how Yellowbrick's capabilities are going to help you address some of the challenges you mentioned? It could be whether it's an industry challenge or one of the ones you just mentioned in the most recent round. Steve, why don't we start with you on that one?
Very interesting question, because we came around to Yellowbrick sort of like Churchill's remark that Americans always do the right thing after they tried everything else. We needed a scalable solution for huge volumes of data with the opportunity to support a wide variety of use cases, data science related, risk analytics related, interactive reporting related, batch, real time, a huge variety of use cases for which many big data technology solutions work well for one or more of those use cases, but not all. And so far, we have not found a use case for which Yellowbrick is not well suited. And the roadmap that's been shared with us suggests that Yellowbrick's leadership is aligned with the thought process that I just described. So not to be overly laudatory, but I came from the supercomputing industry before I entered the commercial activities I'm involved with now. And to my way of thinking, the way Yellowbrick has addressed all the challenges that we've been discussing up to now is as close to, even though it's a closed system in some sense at the present time with respect to both hardware and software, they've come as close to trying to utilize patterns of supercomputing as applied to data capture and analytics as the best example of that as I've seen over the course of a fairly long career in high performance computing. So I guess the key elements that have helped us is the wide variety of use cases that it helps with, the very simple expandability of the product, the very simple administration of the product, and truthfully, the ability to take on new problems and new data sets in a very, very rapid fashion once we had the basic understanding of how to align the capabilities of Yellowbrick to the general use cases that we started with. So the learning curve has been very rapid and the adoption curve has been incredibly rapid without any serious impediments. And so I I would say that from an analytics reporting perspective, the challenges of organizations like like those represented in this discussion probably are well met by the type of approach that Yellowbrick is adopting, and hopefully will continue to be. There is a universal law in computer architecture articulated by a gentleman named Gordon Bell a long time ago, that there's sort of a cycle of reincarnation of computer information technology to support business needs, and towards centralization, then to decentralization, then to centralization again over time. And I think Yellowbrick has hit it right on the nose in terms of being able to facilitate hybrid cloud architecture, while at the same time being able to concentrate so much parallel computing energy around analytic requirements, which are growing in both data volume and complexity.
Oh, that's great to hear. Thank you for that detailed answer. Faye, how about you?
Since we've come over to using Yellowbrick, we are able to deliver more for our clients, more value at faster speeds. We're able to ingest additional data sources that we weren't able to take on before, either because of complexity or size, or the speed with which we were going to be able to process this. And we were able to do that without really changing the economics associated with those engagements. So our perception, our clients' perception of us is that we're continuing to do more, we're doing it better, we're doing it faster, and we're enabling them to be nimble and responsive in the marketplace the way that they need to be. So we are big fans, and we're really glad we made the switch.
Thank you. Mitch, how about you?
One of the things that it's helped with, and I don't know that we thought about this early on, but it's helping with the data sprawl that we've had. We have a lot of, I don't want to call them shadow data teams or shadow IT, but we've got teams they're building data sets, and they're not necessarily putting them in the other appliances or the other data environments that we've had and we manage centrally. So they might sit in network shares, they might sit on laptops, desktops, they might sit in homegrown database systems somewhere. The draw of the speed, the performance, the availability is starting to pull people in where they want to put their data there, which is great because we can't solve for the sprawl immediately. It's a pretty difficult thing to grasp and get a handle on. But rather than having to force people to move their data, they want to. So once they do that, now we can start to say, okay, well, are we duplicating things? Are there things that we should archive? We should no longer retain. Let's clean this stuff up. So that's definitely helped. And the model that we've taken in a lot of cases, one of our analytic platforms in particular is more of, I'd say, a co-op type model where we let people come in and co-develop the things that are there, the data products that are built, and then we've got a team that manages deployment, QA into production. We follow the same thing there, and again, we don't have a bottleneck with a single team managing all of that. So it's really helped us ensure that our processes are really, I'd say, efficient for that type of an appliance. But again, it wouldn't be possible if it wasn't performant and as fast as it is for the data needs that we've got.
Oh, that's great to hear. Well, that's a perfect conclusion to our panel, I think. I want to thank each and every one of you for participating. I really appreciate it. And thank you to attendees for watching. Jeff, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Justin, and thanks to our customers for those insights. So what does the research show? What are some of the trends in database adoption and analytics tools that have been spawned by the pandemic? And how are businesses both making efficient use of their existing platforms and tools and determining where to invest next? For answers to those questions, we turn to our next guest, who is a research director with 451 Research, Matt Aslett. And before I turn it over to Matt, I want to mention that this section is sponsored by our partner, Converge Technology Solutions. Matt Aslett, welcome to Answers.
Thanks, Jeff, and thank you everybody for joining this session, and thanks to Yellowbrick for inviting us to be part of this event. My name's Matt Aslett. I'm Research Director for Data, AI, and Analytics at 451 Research, which is now a part of S&P Global Market Intelligence. And it's a real pleasure to be with you as part of this event. Of course, unfortunately, we can't do that in person. And perhaps to kick things off here, I thought we could look at some survey data. Actually, we've done a few surveys recently asking people about the implications of COVID and how that's affecting their business. And slightly bad news in a way is that this virtual events is the new normal. Certainly, we don't expect to return anytime soon to physical events. We actually see that a third of organizations expect work travel in Q4 to be actually reduced by up to 80% or more in comparison to the previous year. And actually, almost half of enterprises expect travel limitations or bans that have been implemented due to the outbreak to remain in place in the long term. So this is very much the new normal, but obviously we're trying to make the most of it with great events such as this. And there is some other slightly good news we see from our surveys is that actually fewer organizations than expected say they face a major disruption. I don't want to downplay obviously the impact. There are a lot of organizations that are significantly challenged, but we do see we ran surveys in March and then again in June, and we've got another one coming up. But from March to June, we saw actually quite a significant change in that in March, nearly 50% of organizations said they would probably struggle to function beyond 6 months without some kind of major disruption because of coronavirus related issues. Now we see that actually nearly 2/3 of organizations feel they can function for that six months and keep going beyond that. So there's still a lot of challenges that organizations face, but it is quite good news that we see that perhaps less companies feel they are significantly in trouble compared to just a few months ago. The other thing we see, obviously related to coronavirus, is a lot of organizations changing their priorities and changing the initiatives that they have. And there's a lot of numbers on this chart, but so I'll just pick out a few key pieces of information here. We look at overall digital transformation initiatives. We actually see that 25% of organizations tell us they've accelerated or newly introduced digital transformation initiatives specifically because of coronavirus. Look at migration of workloads to the cloud. Again, 22% of organizations accelerating or newly introducing projects. And then data analytics as well, a slightly smaller number, 12% say they're accelerating or newly introducing projects. But it does show that there is a proportion, at least, of organizations that are changing their priorities, driving forward with new initiatives. Of course, on the flip side, at the other end, there are a lot of companies that are actually delaying or canceling projects as well. And I think also what we have to notice is clearly those two things can be happening at the same time. And we see some evidence of this actually from our AI and machine learning survey, from our Voice of the Enterprise AI and machine learning product. And this data point I thought was really, really interesting. So nearly 60% of organizations in this survey told us that specifically due to coronavirus, they're decelerating or halting AI initiatives. At the same time, in the same survey, 3/4 of respondents told us that they're actually investing in new AI initiatives. So, what's going on here? At first glance, these look like they're contradictory, but of course, what we see is that a lot of the existing projects were reliant on existing data, existing models. The word unprecedented is thrown around a lot, in relation to coronavirus, but the changes have truly been unprecedented, and a lot of the existing data and existing models, just isn't fit for purpose. If you're a retailer and you're trying to figure out, once you, as you opened up your stores again, how are people going to respond? How are your customers going to respond? Are they going to come, back into the stores or not? There was just no data on which to base judgments on. And so obviously we see organizations investing in new projects, new initiatives as new data becomes available to them. And we do think that data and analytics and AI and machine learning in particular have a key role to play in relation to organizations, not just surviving this current situation, but potentially thriving. And again, from our surveys, we see some really great evidence of that. For the last 2 years running on this slide, or I think it's actually 3 or maybe even 4 years running, data analytics tools and platforms have been rated as the #1 technology game changer by respondents to our Digital Pulse survey. As you can see, with machine learning and AI, they're at #2. And actually, in the last year, they actually, gained ground over some of the other key technologies. Even though we see a lot of, emerging technologies in there, things like blockchain and container management, a lot of buzz around these new technologies and their potential to really change the game. It's still data and analytics and AI machine learning that is the #1 and 2 respectively. And if you think about what organizations are trying to do in relation to COVID-19, then you really see why data and analytics is so important. You look at companies, they're trying to do things like improve their efficiency and cost cutting. They're trying to understand and evolve their business processes, and they're trying to, as we said, a significant proportion of them are trying to accelerate or start new digital transformation projects, all of which rely on data and analytics. So data and analytics absolutely has a fundamental role to play in organizations, as I say, not just surviving this situation, but actually thriving and then potentially coming out the other side in a better position. A lot of that, is due to what we see as the greater recognition of the importance of data. Data obviously has always been important. It's always had a key role to play in senior decision making. But what we've seen, particularly I've seen this actually, more anecdotally in conversations I've had with end users during the pandemic, is an increased understanding with senior decision makers of the role of data and analytics in creating their plans to come out the other side. And so this was from a survey that was conducted right at the start of the pandemic. So it's an ongoing process, but we've definitely seen an increased proportion of organizations that recognize the importance of data and see that data will be increasingly important to them over the next 12 months. So 82% of respondents see that today, and especially what we've seen, this number has been creeping up in the surveys we've done, but what we've seen is the proportion of those that say it will be significantly more important has jumped up, and as you see, it was nearly 43% of those in the last survey. So there is a greater recognition already, and I think what we see from conversations we've been having is that the pandemic has accelerated that, particularly among senior decision makers. Another of the key trends, obviously, that we see shaping, the market over the last few years has been cloud adoption. And, we've seen, again, it's been going on for many, many years, but we've seen over time an increased maturity of organizations in the way in which they're engaging with cloud, to the extent that, today we see that actually the highest proportion of respondents to our surveys are actually in the cloud maturity stage. There's a broad implementation of product applications and cloud services across the organization. And so, you put these two things together, and no surprise, you see increasingly organizations are moving their data and analytics and BI workloads away from traditional on-premises resources and towards cloud and SaaS and private cloud environments. And this is really highlighted when you ask what's the primary environment. And of course, in years past, the primary environment has overwhelmingly been that traditional server infrastructure, and as you can see, there's going to be a significant drop, at least that's what our survey respondents tell us, in terms of the primary environment. Of course, not all data and analytics workloads run on the same environment. There are multiple environments across lots of organizations. So if we ask about, not just which is the primary environment, but which services are companies using for a different, multitude of applications and workloads, the picture is a bit different. Clearly, we still see on-premises non-cloud declining, but we see, look here in the orange on this slide, that's where companies expect their data processing workloads to be 2 years from now. And look at that, almost an even split there between on-premises non-cloud, on-premises private cloud, hosted private cloud, software as a service, and infrastructure as a service, and platform as a service, not too far behind. And so, the key thing is here, workloads are moving away from on-premises traditional server infrastructure, but they're moving in multiple directions. And this is a challenge that we see a lot of organizations are facing, is trying to figure out, well, which workloads should move where, and more to the point, how do you manage these workloads across different locations? And of course, what we see is, the future for most organizations is hybrid. Hybrid cloud, in some ways, for some time was almost something that companies stumbled into by accident due to different departments or shadow OT spinning up different resources in different clouds. What we see is increasingly organizations are deliberately doing hybrid IT and making use of multiple clouds, including obviously their on-premises data centers, as a strategic choice. And in fact, 42% of organizations tell us they already have a hybrid architecture in place, and an additional 15% are in the process of implementing, and another 15% are planning to implement hybrid. So the future for most organizations is hybrid. And that obviously has some significant implications when it comes to data processing and data warehousing workloads in particular. And in one of our recent surveys, specifically looking at data analytics workloads, we asked about both what's happening with the existing workloads and what's happening with the new workloads. And we see some really interesting things. So, there's whilst a lot of the general movement is towards cloud, there is a significant proportion, 25% of those workloads, that are being modernized in place. And you can see some of the reasons for doing that: security, locality, sovereignty, and of course, making use of existing investments. Companies have made investments in on-premises infrastructure. Clearly, they want to make the most of that investment while they can. And even with new workloads, although a significant proportion of new workloads are obviously being deployed in the cloud, we still see, there is, 13% is still being, companies expect those workloads to be deployed on traditional physical server infrastructure, and 20% are expecting those workloads to be deployed on-premises cloud, even if they're designing for a cloud-native architecture. So you've got about a third of new workloads are still being deployed on premises. So again, really highlights the fact that the future is for most organizations is hybrid. And even though a lot of workloads are either moving to the cloud or being deployed directly to the cloud, organizations need to plan for and be mindful of the reasons why they would be potentially deploying workloads on premises. And as we said, security, locality have a role to play in that. Also, performance and latency clearly are key factors that companies will be thinking about. Of course, what that does mean, and we see this increasingly, is that companies are very much cognizant of, when they're looking at their database providers, is that provider capable of delivering a product that can run on multiple cloud environments, including on-premises data center infrastructure, and are they capable of supporting multiple environments? And no surprise that we see that 85% of organizations tell us that database support for hybrid cloud deployment is important to them, and is something that they are evaluating when they're looking at new new database and data warehouse providers. So that was sort of a rapid run through, obviously, of some of the key trends we see and the environment as it's shaping out here. We've been involved with a number of conversations with our clients around what they should be thinking about with their data and analytics strategies and projects amid COVID-19. And there's a couple of key sort of takeaways that we would recommend to them. I mean, the first is that analytics should absolutely remain an enterprise priority. I think even if companies that are really, really challenged and are cutting back on non-essential spending, they still need to process data and analyze how they can best survive this situation. We do see that it is a data-driven economy, and it remains a data-driven economy, and it's those companies that make the best use of analytics and drive transformation efforts that stand the best chance of outlasting this current situation. Don't let perfection become the enemy of the good, which sounds perhaps a little strange. But what we've seen is, as we talked about, the existing data, existing models, perhaps are not fit for purpose. Companies are having to rethink, both their existing analytics projects and their models, and do some scenario planning. It's impossible to predict how things are going to evolve from here, and so be a bit more pragmatic, be a bit more agile, focus on scenario analysis and planning, and prepare to make rapid decisions as the situation evolves, and we get a little bit more clarity about the shape the world is taking. And therefore, you need to ensure that your data analytics projects and plans are aligned with central transformation initiatives, and and allow the organization to move quickly and pragmatically when it makes sense to do so. And thirdly, of course, whilst there's a lot of focus on what's happening right now, we see that many organizations that are being successful right now, they are remaining focused still on their long-term goals. Yes, there is an opportunity clearly to rethink previous assumptions, and it potentially accelerate transformation plans. But fundamental trends such as the need to address hybrid data processing requirements and the need for good data governance, for example, and security and privacy, etc., remain just as important as ever. And indeed, as we've seen, companies are accelerating perhaps their move to the cloud right now. This issue of hybrid data processing, the ability to manage data across multiple environments is actually arguably more important than ever. So with that, I'll thank you very much for your time. I have to briefly display the slide, but I'll finish with thanking you again for attending this session. Thanks again to the Yellowbrick for having us as part of this event. There's my contact details there. Of course, if you want to follow up on anything I said, you want to find out more details about anything, please do get in contact and let us know. But with that, again, I'll thank you for your time and hand back to Jeff.
So far today, we've talked with our customers about real-world challenges in data analytics, and we've looked at research into trends in these areas to find out how companies are better leveraging existing analytics and data warehouse investments or thinking about new ones. Next, we're going to hear from some of our partners about specific types of analytics modernization that will improve business agility today. I'd like to welcome Ramesh Indraganti, Senior Director of Platforms and AI Engineering at Capgemini, Saurabh Abhyankar, EVP and Chief Product Officer at MicroStrategy, and Ravi Shankar, Senior VP and Chief Marketing Officer at Denodo. And to lead the conversation, our Yellowbrick VP of Business Development, Alan Holmes.
Thank you, Jeff. Welcome to Answers, everybody. This is the Ecosystem Roundtable. I have 3 industry leaders in data analytics to join us on the panel today. So let's meet the panel. So Ravi, can you introduce yourself? Maybe a brief comment?
Sure, happy to be here, Alan. My name is Ravi Shankar. I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for Denodo.
Thank you. Ramesh, how about a few words?
Hey folks, my name is Ramesh Indraganti. I'm a Chief Cloud Data Architect with Capgemini. Been in data management space for a long time.
Yeah. Thanks, Ramesh. And how about you, Saurabh?
Yeah, hi everyone. First of all, thanks for joining us. So I'm the Chief Product Officer here at MicroStrategy, and I hate to say it almost, but I've been in the industry now for I think 17 years in analytics, and still loving it. So I'm happy to be here with you all.
Great, thanks guys. So let me do this. Before we jump into questions, I'd like to define what I call the challenge. So in today's business models are being stressed in new ways. Business continuity requires a pandemic response. Digital transformation improves competitiveness. Hybrid and multi-cloud adoption continues to increase, and business intelligence require real-time answers. So Ramesh, what are you hearing from customers, and how are customers preparing for this challenge?
Yeah, I mean, that's a loaded question with a lot of dimensions to it, right? But mostly what we're seeing with customers is there's a lot of desire to go towards digital transformation. It's mostly business transformation that is kind of flavored with I'm from my focus on financial industry, a lot of financial transformation and then digital transformation. So the way I look at it is the drivers are primarily business transformation, which are compelling customers to look at all these hybrid multi-cloud architectures you talked about. And let's face it, it doesn't matter whether your data, enterprise data is on-prem or in one cloud or hybrid multi-cloud. The intent eventually is to derive insights into the data. And the desire to derive insights is getting intense. And of course, there's smarter and smarter tools, right from relational semantics to the complex MLAI insights that you get into data. So there's a combination of things going on here. Business intelligence continues to be a compelling theme. And I see that BI, analytics, reporting is all becoming very fuzzy now. There's no clear demarcations any longer about traditional reporting versus analytical insight, because the whole data ecosystem is kind of evolving into flux. It's no longer about databases, about database platforms. So a lot of complex things happening in this space.
Oh, great. Thanks, Ramesh. How about you, Ravi? Anything to add?
Yeah, so I would classify, three challenges that I actually hear from my customers. One is the need to have real-time quick decision making. So especially in the current environment, as you know, COVID was upon us for a very quick way, and we all had to pivot our businesses very rapidly. So for that, you need to have a very good understanding of the business and what are the things that you actually change and can change and quickly affect. So that's number one. Number two is self-service. As you saw, gone are the days when the business teams have been so reliant on the IT, which usually takes a long time to turn things around. So the business has been asking for quite a while to enable them to do things by themselves rather than having to be reliant on the IT. So the self-service movement has started, and I think it is gaining full force. The last one I would say is like business continuity. So if you look at IT and the technology landscape keeps changing, right? So there are new tools that are always coming. There are new trends, and the IT, in order to keep the business competitive, they need to innovate. They need to add these new technologies. But when they do so, the first ones that are affected as a result of that are the business users. So either they have to pause or they have to live with less functionality. So that's another challenge. So they are looking, both the IT and the businesses are looking for solutions that will overcome these three challenges.
Great. Hey, thanks, Ravi. Hey, Saurabh, you kind of end up, as Ravi was mentioning, about business users. You spend quite a bit of time with business users. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think the main thing really is, all assumptions are being tested right now. And so if you think about sort of analytics, for the longest time, you kind of got your report, you got your dashboard, and the data was a little bit like, from a human perspective, a little bit predictable. You kind of knew what you were going to get within some boundaries, right? And then all of a sudden, things changed quite a bit. And really, there's sort of two things that come to mind. I spoke to, the first thing I did when this all started is I did like a virtual tour, and I spoke to dozens of customers just to try to get a feel for what's going on. And I realized I didn't know what was going on. And then the first thing is to sort of reiterate what Ravi was saying is really freshness of data. And so we went from ETLing, once a week or whatever it was for any given organization, to suddenly needing to do it every single day, because the data was literally changing every single day, especially for some of our customers that were in retail or finance. The freshness of data was a key thing. And I think we're going to see that once you get used to real-time data, you don't really want to go back to once a month ETLs. That was one big thing. And the second thing that we saw, which was a bit surprising actually, in hindsight it's not, was the type of analytics that people were doing. And so they started doing a lot more analytics around like density analysis, the location of people. A lot of our healthcare providers were trying to figure out how many people are in any given building. They're trying to figure out how to do COVID tracking, employee tracing, but not like, not in a big brother kind of a way, but just being able to, see the relationships, who was in the same office together, things like that. And so those are the big changes that we saw, real-time data being a big one. And then just the nature of analytics changed quite a bit as well. And then, obviously things like geospatial analytics becomes more important and those kinds of things.
Yeah, great. At Yellowbrick, we love real time. So I love that answer. So thanks, guys. So my next question to you, Ravi, is, how can customers leverage hybrid or multi-cloud to improve their data analytics? And I know, as I mentioned earlier, you've done some work with the cloud. So I look forward to your insights on some of the survey work that you've been speaking about recently.
Yeah, so we have been doing annual surveys with our customers, and this is earlier this year we did it for the third time, and there were some very quite revealing facts in there. So definitely hybrid is the way to go. So there are a lot of customers transcend that particular world. For us, it came to be something around 42% of the customers are purely on a hybrid, and when you mix in like the multi-cloud, so the hybrid cloud and the multi-cloud kind of goes hand in hand, and the multi-cloud is becoming more popular. So when you add that, that comes to about like 60 to 70% of the customers that are actually using some form of cloud. So that has increased year over year for us when we have been doing the surveys. Now, if you look at some of the customers that have kind of moved on to such a configuration. So one example would be Logitech, which is a customer of ours. They started about like 6 years back, I would say, a cloud-first mandate of moving all the technology from on-premises to the cloud. And in doing so, they first of all needed the ability to sustain the business while the change basically happens, because it's a major shift, 6 years back. So they used data virtualization as the abstraction layer that enabled them to make the migration one by one, the data warehouse, their MDM solutions, all those things started transitioning to the cloud. And eventually the data virtualization solution also was moved on to the cloud itself. So they were able to migrate within a span of like 2 to 3 years their entire portfolio across the world. So as you know, that global company they have multiple different offices around the world. All the technology, they were able to move it successfully to the cloud and minimize the disruption to the business while they were actually making this change. So that was a great one. So another one I talked about was on the self-service side. So we have another bank called Seacoast Bank, and they actually use data virtualization to enable a lot of the self-service aspect by making the data available to the business users to quickly turn it around rather than having to be reliant on IT. So all these, they were able to leverage the cloud, the self-service aspects to overcome some of the challenges with the data virtualization layer.
Excellent, excellent, thank you. And how about you, Saurabh? What are you thinking?
Yeah, so I mean, again, I've been around long enough to know that there is no sort of altruistic answer to these questions, right? So, people start off and say, I'm going to put everything in my data warehouse, and they say, I'm going to put everything in my data lake, and then they say, I'm going to move everything to the cloud. And the reality is those projects are not usually very smart. And so what we see over and over again is honestly, when we talk about hybrid, what it really means is do what you need to do. Right? Leave certain bits of data on-prem because it's best on-prem, because either because of the technology or the security or a number of different factors, or you just don't want to change it. If you're adopting new cloud technologies, if you're adopting, Snowflake, or if you're adopting ServiceNow or Salesforce or Workday or applications up there, leave the data up there. What a hybrid really allows you to do, just like any kind of virtualization layer, is allows you to leave the data where it is and only move what you need to move to achieve the goal that you have. And it sounds like a really simple kind of a thing, but the worst thing that anybody can embark on is some massive, in the middle of all this, some massive data warehousing project or a massive data lake project that's going to take you, 2 years. I remember customers that embarked on these massive data warehousing projects, and when they were done, they realized the data warehouse was way too slow because put way more into it than they ever expected.
That's right.
And then they had to build a bunch of data marts on top of that. And then, then HANA came along. You know what I mean? So, for the most part, leave the data where it is and virtualize as much as you possibly can.
No, that's excellent. Hey, Ramesh, how about from you got a very broad perspective. You see a lot of customers, kind of end to end. So, what are your thoughts?
Yes. So. I think there are a lot of recurring themes that I see about which both Ravi and Saurabh are talking. But in my mind, this notion of hybrid cloud is not a conscious manifestation by enterprises. A lot of times it does happen, but I would think majority of hybrid clouds, or by virtue of how the enterprise can spin off from the data center to public cloud, they don't often control or have the insights to control those dynamics. So invariably, you land up with a hybrid architecture. With the intent, with lean and efficient enterprises, they have the ability to slowly and gradually move all the assets into public cloud. But it's easier said than done for large enterprises. So they will land up grappling with a hybrid cloud architecture where you have critical assets split both within on-prem as well as in the public cloud. And we have seen some customers who are off the bat very smart about what their data topology in the grand scheme of things is going to look like. So they are multi-cloud by aspiration and design. But that's again a small minority of customers who have the time, wherewithal, and the chops to do it. But there's some other customers who are multi-cloud by virtue of acquisitions. So we have seen customers who have gone into, let's say, AWS, and they have acquired something. There's a critical data asset from a different line of business that is now part of this enterprise sitting in, let's say, Azure or GCP. So that's where some of the complex challenges are for enterprises to make a decision about how do we resolve, do we move these assets and redeploy the entire solution architecture for a line of business, or if we keep it there, how do we be smart about it? And I'm sure, virtualization technologies and complex multi-cloud replication technologies are all playing a big place, big role in this space. So that's my general perception of how the hybrid cloud, multi-cloud is evolving. And data analytics, as you know, is all pervasive. It doesn't matter you're hybrid, you're on-prem, you're split between multi-clouds. The desire for the business doesn't care really where you are. They keep asking questions and you have to answer them. So the belief and the hope throughout is that with this auto-scaling, elastic computing paradigms across all these cloud ecosystems, you now, as a technology organization, have the chops to respond to business with the speed of business. But that's what is happening, I think.
One point, Alan, I would like to throw in there, this, the terminology of hybrid cloud has evolved in the sense that we talked about it from an on-prem and cloud perspective, but now some of the people associate the private cloud and the public cloud as a hybrid cloud. So they talk about it from that particular perspective as well. So just to say that there are different definitions and the definitions keep evolving.
Yeah, to that point, Ravi, sorry, Alan, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Ravi brought a good point, which is, the customers, some of the customers we're seeing who are planning well, they are actually building cloud native capabilities within the on-prem tech stack, right? Yeah. I'm talking about 4 or 5 years ago, right? Be it Docker containers or any kind of container-based packaging, bringing DevOps into the big data lakes. So they're kind of getting geared towards lifting and shifting some of these compute loads into public cloud with the least amount of change to deal with. So that's truly the hybrid cloud, because you now have private cloud with cloud native technologies. Totally agree with you.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's matured a bit is what is cloud, and I think everybody thought it was the public cloud, and there's so much more to it. And I think we're starting to really peel the layers back on what cloud means and how it gets deployed. And you guys have done a wonderful job of articulating, I think, some of the scenarios that are going on. And Saurabh, you mentioned modernization. I'd love to maybe just as a follow-on, what are you guys seeing is around modernization? Are companies starting to really kind of grasp it and understand the value of modernizing not only the data infrastructure, but also kind of in and around from an application and in a broader sense?
Yeah, actually, you bring up a good point. Yeah, you bring up a good point around the definition of cloud, and I think where it's evolved, there was this altruistic, it must be this, and this, right? It must be multi-tenanted, it must have performance isolation, it must be subscription, it was all these definitions. That's now, right. I think what we've actually evolved to is the value proposition of the cloud, right? That it's turnkey, that it's easy, that it's scalable, that's elastic. But it's also about, evolving to really focusing on the business use cases and accomplishing the business use cases, and the technology kind of follows, right? And so again, getting a little bit away from like the old dogma of being altruistic for technology's sake, and more towards delivering value proposition and working with the business users is a big shift that I'm seeing.
That's a good point. Good point. Ravi, anything to add, or?
Yeah, from a modernization perspective, you see that many of these customers moving on onto the cloud, and Saurabh kind of talked about all these multiple different cloud vendors. There's a challenge that actually comes out to me, like in the computer world, we've all been around for a long time, so every solution creates its own problem after a few years, right? So right now the problem with so many vendors kind of coming on board is that there are different strengths each of these technologies clouds have. So the modernization kind of brings about its own set of challenges, and that's where I think it's very important as the technologists kind of map their journey to the cloud. They need to be able to make sure that they have a strategy, a neutral, I would say, a data layer that will allow them to be able to move things because things are going to change, rather than being tied to something else. Because right now you're going to incur like egress charges once you come out of a cloud. So that's why these guys are going to hold you on to their cloud and don't want you to leave, right? So by having a more strategic enterprise data layer, you basically solve the problem of being able to go with whatever cloud you want, depending upon the capabilities or the location, and then be able to move the data around very quickly without having to incur any egress charges. So I would say to keep that in mind as people plan their strategy to the cloud.
Yeah, there's a business model aspect, a commercial part of it, and of course, there's always technology that plays into this. Ramesh, any kind of final words on modernization before I move to our next question?
Yeah, you mentioned three interesting things: business, technology, and commercial. But I think there is also a cultural angle to this, because a lot of people seem to think about deploying cloud solutions or modernization towards cloud, but they seem to carry out a lot of mindset that they currently have in the data center. Just a simple example: the network team wants to control the network, the DBAs want to control the databases, the server team wants to do something. So that is not going to hold good any longer. I think that's the fundamental cultural shift that's required for large enterprises. I don't think small enterprises grapple with this. They might, but I've seen this in some big enterprises' mindset. I think that's very, very, very important, besides having the chops to solve the technology problem. It's pretty exciting, and the spectrum is pretty wide.
Yeah, we're all in a good space right now. I think data and data warehousing and analytics all is in the hot seat right now, which is great. And you brought up an interesting point, Ramesh, about silos, and those are going to have to come down. And I think they're continuing to be challenged, but they'll have to come down for all this to really work, right?
They absolutely will. If we're aspiring for efficiency, agility, and speed with technology, those walls will be stripped down.
Yeah, great. All right, let me move to our final question for the session. What advice do you have for customers to improve their future competitiveness? And Saurabh, I'll start with you, because I know you've spent some time. I've watched a webinar that you did around hyperintelligence, and I found it very fascinating about some of the things that you're thinking about from a product and a services point of view. But how would you extend that? What would you coach a customer to kind of think about starting to future-proof?
Yeah, this might sound a little bit like fluffy, but the truth is the biggest challenges that we see over and over again, and Ramesh brought it up as well, is it's really cultural, right? And you have to, the most important thing that you can invest in as whether you're an IT team or whatever project you're on, is making sure that there's stakeholder alignment and a clear direction for where you're trying to go. And again, that sounds like just an obvious thing to state, but if you start with that, if you start with very tight teamwork with the business users, know really what the business outcomes are, and then work your way back to the tech, and realize that the business goals will change as people come and go and as the world changes. The technology is kind of second, and that's kind of wonderful situation that we're in right now. Is like you can do almost anything. There is a ton of technology out there, and actually, things have diversified so much that you can choose from a number of different vendors, all the way from the database, sorry, Yellowbrick, but all the way up to the BI vendors like us, right? And so the one thing I would leave everybody with is maybe two things. One is work, like really it's human. Work with people, work with the business users, work with your stakeholders, be transparent, right? That's the first part. And then number two is maintain flexibility in whatever technology choices you make. Because we talked about hybrid cloud. Hybrid cloud is really about flexibility. All these things are about flexibility. And if you maintain flexibility, then you might acquire another company and you'll be able to absorb whatever other tech they might have. And so at MicroStrategies, for what it's worth, we believe in data federation. We believe in things like hyper intelligence, where you can inject insights into other people's applications. You don't have to go entirely to our stack or anything like that. So I definitely recommend being as independent and flexible as you can, and adjusting as you're working with the business users on their outcomes.
No, that's some pretty good advice. Ramesh, what are your thoughts?
So I think the obvious things about all the cutting edge things that are happening on public cloud is a no-brainer for anyone if you're advising customers about being future-proof. All the things around MLA, MLOps, DevSecOps, data platforms, BI tools, all that is given. But I think it's also important for customers to understand and be tuned into what's happening in the open source world. Because a lot of evolution of products that we're seeing on the cloud space has some invariable connect with some open source. So I don't think customers should be not plugged in with open source while they're pursuing hybrid multi-cloud solutions with the public cloud providers. And then there's also so much evolution within the product space, especially data processing products, right from Yellowbrick, which is the first one to do bring database instructions into Flash. So these things are going to change the game foundationally, as you understood technology in the data center, let's say 5 years ago, from all the way until 2014 or 2015, right? So those things are getting redefined. Now how does those redefinitions of your ability to process data at such lightning speeds mean to you in the modern context? So these things, I think, these kinds of breakthroughs are very vital for customers to be tuned into as they invest. Because at the end of the day, it's all about change. You invest today with a vision of being invested in the future for the next 4 years, but how do you deal with the breakthroughs and changes from now to 4 years, within those 4 years? I think that's the key part. Yeah.
So that's part of what Saurabh was talking about in terms of having a little bit of agility and the ability to be, or flexibility is probably the right term, about how you're going about solving that particular problem today, and think about, it's going to change in the future. And so how do you prepare for that? Right? How
Absolutely.
do you keep that option open, right?
Yeah, and one last thing is, what with my observation is, the tech stacks, complex tech stacks, multi-billion-dollar worth solutions, all that is good, but I think the biggest problem enterprises have now is about data, which is metadata, which is data governance. This becomes like a supremely important aspect for the enterprise when you talk about multi-cloud.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, that's a great lead-in, Ravi. So when you start talking about data and data movement and data governance and where you're at, what would you tell a kind of a customer to help prepare?
I would talk about if you want to maintain your competitiveness, you want to be more agile organization. You need to have the flexibility. We all know the notion, the story behind the dinosaurs. They became extinct because they were not able to adapt. Especially in the current year, you look at how the budgets were basically cut on the IT side. The staff was actually reduced, and I'm actually seeing many companies who are very agile to make the change very quickly to be able to pivot are the ones that have actually sustained. Some of them have actually thrived. A lot of businesses have actually gone under in this particular climate. So I would actually leave with three things to consider for technology teams as they prepare for this agility and the competitiveness. Number one, have some kind of a data abstraction and intermediary layer that separates from the business side from the underlying technology. Technology is going to change, business is going to change. They move at different paces. You don't want to tie one to the other very tightly. So having an intermediary layer helps with the flexibility. Number two is reduce the data points from the source to the destination. So you have the data that is you're collecting. The business users, the analysts need to be able to quickly know the data. So when we had to change, we were extremely prevalent on the trade shows. That's how we were actually generating a lot of the leads. That all disappeared very in a matter of days. And we had to quickly pivot in terms of the virtual events. And I went back to my team asking for statistics on how well we have done, what type of virtual channels have worked well, and so on. To be able to get that such a data in a quick, short amount of time is very important, going from the source to the destination. And the last thing along those lines is the real time. So we can't wait to get the data, days or even hours later. We want the data immediately, because as the business leaders, we want to make the decisions and put the right processes and policies in place that will move the business in the right direction. So without that, we will all become dinosaurs.
That's great advice. We all want to move forward. We want to move positively. We're in this to not only help our customers, but we're in it to make money. So that's all good. So we've got a kind of running in the end here. Are there any, Ramesh, 30 seconds, what would you want to tell somebody that you haven't said already? Anything?
Among the important things that we want to advise to customers who are going to public cloud is always have the ability to roll back. Like by intent, by design, you engineer your approach in such a way that you can yank yourself out of cloud A, go to cloud B, or yank out of both clouds, come to on-prem. You need to have those chops in your approach. Otherwise, it could be, a lockdown with bad contracts.
It's lock-in, right?
Yeah, it's like a bad marriage.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to think about this as you navigate.
How about you, Saurabh?
I just say throw out your assumptions, right? Like this is the big, aside from obviously the human tragedy, but from a pure business perspective, this is one of the biggest experiments of our generation. Everything we thought was true is maybe untrue. It's all very questionable. And so throw out your sort of old dogma and assumptions and, give things a try, A/B test things, be super flexible. The world will change again. But I think there's all kinds of opportunity around us right now for us to sort of seize and be successful.
That's awesome. Thanks. How about you, Ravi?
Yeah, I would say, as I mentioned before, right now, the budgets have been cut and staff have been reduced, and the CIOs basically start hunkering down and they start keeping the money, not really spending it on the innovation. I would say there are technologies that will actually help lower your TCOs and be able to provide you the innovation. So I wrote a blog on that one. So cloud, data virtualization, these kind of technologies do enable you to keep the competitiveness while reducing your costs. So don't be shy about spending in those ones and continuing to innovate. Just be more creative. That's what I would say.
Outstanding. Great. Hey, thank you guys for participating in the discussion. A lot of good insights. I think there's a lot for customers to go think about, leveraging your experience and what you guys are hearing across the board. So again, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for the audience for participating. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you, Jeff. Thanks.
We've come to the final section of our program today. We've focused in the past couple of hours primarily on the critical role that data warehouses and analytics play in our businesses and how we get more and faster insight from those systems. But there's another role that data and analytics play, a huge one, and it's in the fight against COVID-19 and better understanding how the virus spreads. We asked ZDNet journalist Chris Matislik to sit down with Dr. Mike Osterholm, the state epidemiologist of Minnesota. Dr. Mike has been an outspoken voice in the pandemic, calling on state, local, and national governments to do even more to control the spread of the virus. The role of data and analytics can't be understated in this battle. This section of the program is sponsored by MicroStrategy. Let's join Chris and Dr. Mike Osterholm.
Dr. Osterholm, This is an interesting way of ending this event that's called Answers for a World That Can't Wait, given that it's just you and me, thousands of miles apart, but a lot of people are watching. So I'd like to start by imagining there's an audience, because some of the audience have been in touch with me. And there's one particular question that data and analytics experts have wanted me to ask you, and I'm not going to resist that question. You see, it strikes me that there's a certain irony right now that as businesses have become much more data-driven and much more, one could argue, data respectful, perhaps in your field and in, how can I put this politely, some governments, some individuals, the actual veracity and the integrity of your data is being challenged from, let's say, not entirely an expert way. And so what the data and analytics experts I've talked to want me to ask you is, how do you handle it? How do you cope when suddenly your enormous expertise is being challenged in a way that perhaps might be as never before?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Chris, for having me. It's good to be with you. And I surely appreciate that opening fastball with a little curve to it. That's a great way to start this. Let me just say that we have to look at data analytics and what I do and what others in the public health world do from two different perspectives. One is, we all know data are just data, meaning that they may not have much veracity or validity depending on how they're collected. The second thing is, and how do we use those data? Can we actually mine the data that we have? And if we have solid data, the mining can surely yield a great deal of very important and useful information. But if the data to begin with are poor, I don't care what kind of mining you do, you still have a challenge. So if I look at those two, the first thing is that science by its very nature is a self-correcting discipline. It is one where it's almost like tacking in a sailboat. You know, you learn a little bit more about this, but as the more you learn, you find out, well, wait a minute, this wasn't quite what I thought it was. And you do that, and to the point, each time you refine those data, every time that you actually advance your information, you advance knowledge, and that's what's important about understanding. So when people say to us, well, you know, last March, you didn't know this or this or this, or this is what you said, and now it's different, that's because science is self-correcting. So that kind of data should build on itself, and that's what we need to do. That is a challenge, however, because when you don't collect good data, then you do have that second issue of no matter what you do with it, how good will it look? And I think, for example, in this country, we were blind initially in terms of who was being infected with COVID-19 and the virus, because we didn't have testing. So our data was virtually non-existent, or what little we had was very skewed. It was biased towards, looking only in certain areas for possible cases. So there's an example where we did fail to get good data. And I don't care what kind of mining you did of it, it was always going to be a problem. And so I think the answer back to your colleagues is that this is a real challenge for us right now, both in terms of the quality of the data and the quantity of the data that we're getting. And if there was anything, this should call out loud and clear why the U.S. government, the agencies of the government that are involved with this response, and why, in general, we need to do a much, much better job of, one, how do we collect data, what data would we collect, and then once we do it, how do we analyze it to make it most meaningful to the public, and most notably in disease prevention. That's the whole purpose of collecting these data to begin with.
Right. Let me take you back, though, to January the 20th, when you annoyed a lot of important people, and I think probably some of them self-important people, when you sent an email and said, yo, well, you probably didn't say yo, but you said, excuse me, but the data is telling me that this is a pandemic. What was it about the data that told you that?
Well, first of all, it's being an old man with 45 years worth of experience. You know, it's kind of one of those things you play in your head. I've seen this show before, or this looks different than any show I've seen before. And so part of it is that issue. You know, when one is collecting data, I like to use the analogy, what is it that center fielder for that baseball team knows what to do as soon as the ball hits that bat and the ball is going to become roaring at him? how does he or she know to go to the left or the right, or go go further back? The speed at which they have to go to get there. They don't think. They basically react to what has been a learned experience with all their eyes, their ears, all of the senses they have. The experience of how much wind's occurring, the experience of basically how does a ball carry in that particular stadium. And so on January 20th, I was relying in large part on a lot of that experience of, what would it look like if a pandemic were to occur? Notably, we had access at that time to information that others suggest never were available, but they were, namely social media. We had several contacts on the ground in Wuhan who we were talking to. And by the 10th of January, when we confirmed that this was a coronavirus, and we were seeing people who obviously were infected through asymptomatic infection routes, meaning they didn't have contact with any clinical cases that they knew of. We also saw transmission occurring in people who then traveled to Thailand, to Hong Kong, other areas, also supporting the concept that there was widespread transmission occurring. And then just seeing what was happening in the hospitals of Wuhan. This was not SARS, this was not MERS. This was a new coronavirus doing something we'd never seen before. So if you add that all in to that baseball analogy, on January 20th, I felt unfortunately confident, nonetheless very, 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 very scared in a sense that, oh my God, look what's happening. This is going to be the next pandemic. And I said such.
Now, allow me to tell you some things I've learned over the last couple of weeks about the coronavirus. For example, that salmon harbor it for a week, that people wearing glasses are far less susceptible to COVID than people not wearing glasses, and that gyms are perfectly safe because out of 49 million visits, a mere 1,155 people were actually diagnosed with COVID. Now, all these studies appeared in, how can I put this, largely public spheres. In your case, as you're watching data just swarm upon you every day, how can you pass the good data from, how much work is that in order to make sure, as you say, that anything you find and discover from other people's work is worthy of being treated as even vaguely truth?
Well, one of the challenges we have today is understanding the difference between data and scientific facts. And data inform the formation of scientific facts, but data in and of itself is not a scientific fact. And I think that that's where the quote unquote human condition comes in. How do we make that decision? How do we know that the information we've obtained, in fact, is factual? For example, the things you just said, we do not have any data that eyeglasses, in fact, have reduced the cases of SARS-CoV-2 transmission. There has been an assumption that based on the fact that droplets, were they to get into the eyes, could in fact cause an infection. And so people have concluded that, but without the data. And one of the problems we're having right now is that we have had, in a sense, and I say this with humility and respect, but a cottage industry of experts coming forward in COVID who were never that. In fact, when you asked me just now about what was happening on January 20th, some of the people who are the loudest critics of me suggesting this was going to cause a pandemic and that we should all be worried about flu instead, or today some of the talking heads we see on TV every day talking about how bad the COVID pandemic is. And so we got to remember that this is the job of what we as humans do versus what machines do necessarily. And understanding machine learning is important. But the fact is that why do I say glasses we don't know? Because we don't have really a good understanding yet of how often transmission occurs because of the incursion of the virus in the eye as opposed to being breathed in. When you say that the gyms are not a major source of transmission, there are several factors there. Were the gyms in areas where, in fact, infected individuals would come to the gym? If they were there, did we do contact tracing once we found out that they had been to a gym on the people who had been there? Or are we just assuming that because of the number of cases might occur in an area who say they've been to a gym and the number of people who live in that area or who went to that gym, we can't say that there hasn't been transmission. We're seeing that right now with airplanes. The fact that we're now picking up more and more cases of individuals who say, I don't know if I got on the airplane. I also went not only to the airplane, but I was in the airport. I went to a reception that night after I got there. I rode in a cab with an individual to get to the hotel. I was in the hotel, by the way, too, and I spent some time in the lobby having a drink with a friend. Now, you tell me, where did that person get that virus? Was it the airplane? Was it the airport? Was it the hotel? Was it the cab? That's what our job is to try to discern what we can learn from that. All those were pieces of data, but not one of them actually gave us the conclusion. And that's what is so important about understanding data and the assimilation of facts.
Right. Now, when you're looking at research in general, when you're creating epidemiological models, how do you account for the human factor? And I ask this because of the University of Illinois. Now, as I understand it, they wanted students to come back and they got a couple of physicists involved, don't ask me why, and a chemical engineer and a civil engineer, an environmental engineer. And they even modeled that students would go to parties. But what they never managed to anticipate is that students who tested positive still went to parties. Do I have that right?
You do. First of all, let me just say, people who are modelers are a class unto their own, and I'll come back on that comment in a minute. But I just want to say my hat is off to the University of Illinois and what they did. I was skeptical a bit at first that they would be able to accomplish as much as they have, both in their modeling and what they've done with their testing program. And I think that they have done a remarkable job. And they've handled this as well as anybody could. And they had a very realistic model. I have often said, as you've heard it said time and time again, all models are wrong, but occasionally some give you useful information. And in this case, the one at the University of Illinois was wrong, but it gave us very useful information and it was self-correcting. So I think that's what's important today is understanding that. I, for one, have a certain disdain for models. I find them actually more challenging than helpful more often than not. I can tell you that in a number of situations I've been involved with just in recent years, when the CDC did a model suggesting that as many as 1 million cases of Ebola would occur in West Africa in just 2 of the countries in the next 6 months, and the number total over the rest of the entire epidemic was under 20,000, that gave people a sense that we were just hyping it, that we didn't know what was going on, but we were hyping it for our own purposes. I've seen the same thing with COVID-19 and the modeling that's gone on. I think some of it's been just pure, unspeculated kind of hype. And so I worry about that because in the end, we're held accountable in a way that, the precision is not there to give the kind of information these models proclaim to have. And then when it doesn't work out 6 months later, we're left holding the bag as public health people saying, see, you misled us.
Yeah. Now, tell me about countries that have been successful. And I think some people will always point to New Zealand that has been apparently successful. But I think countries that perhaps don't get as much publicity, like Senegal, like Rwanda, like Taiwan, what did they do, in your view, that was better than what, let's say, not just the United States, but let's include the United Kingdom, because that's the way I talk. What did they do better?
That's kind of like asking me, having nice weather today, and you asked me that on June 1st, you asked me that on January 15th in Minnesota. And I can tell you that chances are it's going to be a lot better in June than it is in January. So right there, that's the big difference. What's happening right now is this virus is playing out around the world in different locations. And imagine it like a big coronavirus forest fire, where it'll burn hot, it'll burn intense, and it'll consume lots of acres. And occasionally there are spots that are left bare. We don't know why. And oftentimes the fire embers will come back in that area and then finally burn it days later. So what's happening is that we're seeing not even distribution of the virus across the world and where it's doing its damage. Case in point, in March, April, and May, I heard so many times from people, well, we got to do what California is doing. And I think it's because they don't have public transportation. That's where this virus is being transmitted. Look how well they're doing. And then all of a sudden July happens and California is on fire. Well, I guess suddenly public transportation or the lack thereof wasn't the factor at all. Why did it not happen right away in California when it did happen elsewhere? We're seeing that around the world. I just have had this happen time and time again with Sweden, a country which proclaimed that they were going to try to get to herd immunity early on by letting infections kind of run somewhat unfettered. They had a challenge, as you know, in nursing homes, which then led to an increased number of deaths, and they were panned for that activity. Well, then for the last 10 to 12 weeks, they've had relatively very low numbers, and everyone was saying, well, maybe Sweden did get it right. Maybe they do have herd immunity, which of course they don't. Their percentage of people previously infected are in the teens, not 50 to 60%. Well, guess what? The last week, look what's happened in Sweden. We're now reporting 1,200 to 1,600 cases a day. So, they're back up again. And it's just a function of time and what kind of suppression, mitigation we put on the virus. The states that saw houses on fire in July, California, Texas, Arizona, Georgia, Florida, I'm certain that by the middle of the fall, they'll be back. They'll be really in bad shape again. And so it's just a function at the time. People did limit their contact with others as things were so bad, but that in fact, when we come back again, there's still a lot of people left to get infected. That'll happen. So I'm very careful about interpreting data at a given point for any place. The one thing I do want to add to that, though, I think, Chris, you hit on an important point. Boy, I wish we all could be an island. If you're New Zealand, even Australia, Taiwan, Iceland, Singapore, to the extent that it's a tip of an island, you might say, all have a much higher likelihood of containing this because they contain the virus coming in and out of the location. And they did do that, and to their credit, these areas have done a much better job than much of the world.
So let's agree, you and I, we're going to meet in a year's time. We're going to have the very same discussion. And I know you like to end your podcasts with lyrics from songs. I mean, you're into Carole King, Springsteen, Spike Milligan. Probably no one listening to this knows other than me who Spike Milligan is. And so I hope that in a year's time, you and I will sit there and we will be reciting We Are the Champions from Queen rather than Queen's first hit, which is Keep Yourself Alive. Dr. Michael Osterholm, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. This was, of all the interviews I've done in this whole entire pandemic, not one like this before. Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're at the end of our program. I hope you found the past couple of hours informative and took the time to engage with us. A reminder that we're leaving our chat window open for the next couple of hours. If you want to chat with us, our partners or sponsors, please do. And today, we didn't talk much about Yellowbrick and our products. That was intentional. Today wasn't about us. It's about the challenges and opportunities that you face with your analytics systems. If you're interested in learning more about Yellowbrick and our unique hybrid cloud data warehouse, visit us online at yellowbrick.com. And in 2 weeks, you can join us on October 15th for a virtual event where we will talk more about us. In the meantime, I'm Jeff Spicer, and for all of us here at Yellowbrick, thanks for joining us. And remember, create a culture of real-time analytics. Your business depends on it. Thanks, and have a great day.
Organizations of all kinds rely on data analytics, and those analytics are more important than ever. But current systems are failing under the stress of new data volumes, complexity, and an increasing number of users. They're too slow, too inflexible, and too expensive to upgrade and maintain. Meanwhile, the unpredictable costs and unreliable performance of cloud-only systems make them a risky option. But there's a better way, a hybrid cloud approach to data analytics. This offers you the performance of specialized systems and the agility of the cloud, while avoiding the drawbacks. Enter Yellowbrick, the only modern data warehouse for hybrid cloud. We combine breakthrough performance, concurrency, and scale with the flexibility of running your analytics either on-premises or from any major public cloud, or any combination of the two, all through a fixed-cost annual subscription. Deployment and management are so simple, you can be running meaningful analytics within hours. How did we do it? We reinvented analytic database architecture and deployment models from top to bottom, shattering previous limitations. Now companies in financial services, telecom, retail, and other industries can get faster, richer, more accurate insights, all while saving millions in costs. Yellowbrick gives you the power to make the right decisions, the ones that vault your business ahead of the competition, now and in the future. Schedule a demo at yellowbrick.com.